Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last episode of Freedom Side Live this year. In the year
2025.
2025. What a year it has been. I'm Rania Khalek. Wow, what an opener. I'm Rania Khalek, and I want to tell you now, I am very jet lagged because I just got to Lebanon, where there's a 7-hour time difference. And so please forgive my brain rot if it exists today for you guys, which I'm sure it will. And joining me to co-host today is one of my favorite people in the world, Zoe Alexandra, editor of People's Dispatch. Zoe, welcome back to the Freedom Side Live as a host today.
Thank you so much. I'm pretty excited for all the things we're going to dive into.
So am I. We have a great show for everyone today. We are going to be talking about lots of things that took place this year, including the first year of Syria, sans Assad. Syria, first year post-regime change with Elijah Magnier, who will be joining us shortly. We've got Vijay Prashad to talk about the end of the year geopolitical wrap, things that have gone down this year, what we should look for in 2026. And after a lot of fails in 2025, hopefully some wins coming in 2026. And we've got the lovely Katie Halper to talk about the disgusting weaponization of the Bondi Beach shooting in Australia and the way that's being used to attack the pro-Palestine movement. And me and Zoe will be discussing the war on Venezuela, which has escalated dramatically. I mean, you could say that every week it's escalated dramatically, but just in the last few days, it's escalated even more dramatically. So we'll be getting into that. And before we jump into our first guest, I do want to remind our audience that we are an independent media outlet here at Breakthrough News, and we're able to keep going and growing because of support from our viewers. So if you support Breakthrough News and you want to throw some money at us because that helps make us better, go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and become a member. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. I've finally been reunited with one of my favorite pieces of merch, this very cool Breakthrough News mug. And I think it comes in 2 colors, but they only gave me 1 color. So give us more money so I can get the second color.
So true.
But also so we can do more amazing reporting. We have so much what we're going to be doing in 2026, and we can't wait to announce it. And Zoe's going to be alongside us to announce that. So keep your ears and eyes out for that. But also make sure you like this episode. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure that you're subscribed to notifications. So hit the bell and hit all so that you can actually get a notification on your device whenever we post new content, because sometimes, or a lot of times these days, YouTube doesn't want to feed it to you in the algorithm because the algorithm hates us. But in 2026, New Year's resolution, we're going to make that algorithm like us again. I don't care if I sound idealistic. Zoe, do you have anything that you want to add as one of our favorite recurring hosts?
Well, continue to support independent media. We're out there for you to tell you the stories. We know this year has been a lot. And how would you be able to make sense of it all without Breakthrough News? How would you be able to understand that, what has happened in this Trump presidency year? I'm very excited to talk about that. So where would you be without us, basically?
Where would you be without us, indeed? And I just want to add that I love that we've been able to cover the news this year, but I think next year, one thing I really want to do, because I think we're all feeling it, Zoe, it's a kind of this feeling of defeat. I don't want to get stuck in defeatism because we haven't been defeated.
No.
So in 2026, we're not just going to be bringing you the news and analysis, but I want to talk and I want to address on my show, on other programs, how we push back, how we resist all of the horrors that seem to be getting worse with each passing day. Because we can't, drop into defeatism and depression. That's how the evil people win. So on that note, Zoe, I would love, very honored to welcome our first guest to the show, Elijah Magnier. Elijah is a geopolitical analyst and veteran war correspondent who has spent decades covering the Middle East. And Elijah, we are so happy to have you back on the show. It's great to see you.
Hello to both of you. I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. And we want to talk to you today about Syria, though we obviously can't talk about Syria with addressing some of the other things happening in the region. But I think a good place to start, Elijah, is that it's been a year since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Israel now raids Syria at will. Large parts of the south are occupied. A former ISIS emir, Ahmed al-Shara, has declared himself president while aligning with the U.S. and courting Israel. And that's all happening while the U.S. is doing things like this. I actually want to take this moment, Elijah, before I ask you my question, to show a clip of something Trump said just recently about his plans for the Golan Heights in Syria.
The Golan Heights, the rights to the Golan Heights over to Israel. Nobody thought that was possible to get. They've been working on it for 70 years, Mark. 70 years. You know, planes would fly into places that have meetings that would last 2-3 days. All they talked about was the Golan Heights, right, Jason? And nobody ever did anything, but I did it, and we did it quickly. And I say, good luck to you. Then I found out the value of it, trillions of dollars. It could be worth, if you think, trillions of dollars. I said, you know, maybe I should have asked him for something.
So there you have Donald Trump, president of the United States, seeming to think that it's his right to give away a piece of land that belongs to Syria. I think at one point he almost called it the Golden Heights. But Elijah, perfect segue into my first question for you. You know, what's your overall assessment of Syria today, politically, militarily, socially, after 1 year post-Assad?
Before I start, I was watching you presenting the topic of the day. And when you first mentioned Syria, your face changed and your smile went away. That was...
Shows you
Anyway, you're right. I mean, I really can't blame you, because what happened in Syria is really something unusual to see after all these decades, seeing Syria not asking for the return of the Golan Heights and asking Israel only to withdraw from the occupied territory that Israel took control of after the 8th of December 2024. And then hearing Syria for the first time saying we do not represent any danger and we are not against Israel. On the contrary, we want to have good relationship with Israel, and then having on the other side Benjamin Netanyahu, an ICC fugitive for his war crime, not really wanting to have a deal with Syria, because that means for him to pull back and withdraw from all the occupied territory and not having a full access and control over Syrian airspace and violating Syria's sovereignty anytime he wants. So what happened in the last year is something unique. We have seen a shift in foreign policy, where Syria went 100% to Turkey, obviously, because Turkey was behind the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, and then just be in the arms of the United States, being received in the back door at the White House, and then having the U.S. defending Syria and asking Israel not to attack it, because Ahmed al-Shara is really 100% devoted to the security of Israel and not doing anything that upset Israel, which takes us to what Israel has done immediately following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. It has destroyed most of Syria's military capability, naval force, air force, missile unit, missile warehouses, missiles industry. And the only thing that we heard from the Syrian is that Israel was destroying what used to belong to Bashar al-Assad, like it is no longer the property of Syria, and like Syria was not interested in defending itself or protecting itself, at least. And Syria today has only light weapons that can support it only in case of a civil war, which is something that is looming above Syria, where the Alawites have been facing massacres on the coast. The Kurds have no intention to join the government, and the Druze in the south have their own kind of co-federation, but they more lean to stand with Israel, and Israel prevented the Syrian army or police force from patrolling or being present in the south, in the Sueda, when Damascus was forced to give the control to the local forces that are the Druze, selected by the local and with no control over Damascus. What we have seen also is the lift of sanctions, the Caesar Act, but we did not see any reconstruction because Syria is in need between 600 to 700 billion dollars, and no one now is really willing to invest this amount where there is no stability. ISIS is still there in the Badia, and the country is still divided.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, you touched on a lot of points there, Elijah, and I just wanted to go back to one. It's interesting because in those images we see al-Shara meeting with like every single dignitary possible. He was very busy last year on international trips, taking meetings that world leaders refused to have with Bashar al-Assad for years. And of course, always with this excuse of the atrocities that Bashar al-Assad has carried out. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, al-Shara's forces have been repeatedly accused of carrying out massacres against minorities in the south, along the coast. So first, can you talk to this and who's backing him? How is he able to really position himself to maintain control while also, clearly combating different forces at the same time?
Well, Ashara wanted recognition, and this is why he's receiving everybody so he can feel he is recognized as the president of Syria, because he moved from, as Rania said at the first beginning, he was an ISIS emir in Iraq, and then he moved to the request of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the ISIS emir caliphate, to Syria, and then he turned against him, became the emir of Al-Qaeda, and then he became pro-Turkey. So taking him seriously as a president is not an easy task. So Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey try really to rebrand him and to whitewash him as a potential president. And so far, the only thing he has achieved is to show that Syria is open to all countries, at the exception of Iran and the axis of the resistance, and that Syria is really part of the Western club and would like to be part of the Western club, that the West is not yet accepting Syria. Now, you're right to mention the attack on minority, but there were also attacks on the Kurds in the northeast and in the south in Sueda. This is why the minority are very afraid, including the Christian in the center. So he is consolidating his power where there are the majority Sunni and where the minority that are living in Damascus, in Homs, in Hama, and Aleppo cannot rise against the majority, at the exception of the Kurds, who have a small part of Aleppo. Therefore, we do not see any stability in the country. Most of the area of Al-Raqqa, Deir Zur, still need to be reconstructed. The electricity is back more hours now than it used to be before, because Bashar al-Assad was under heavy sanctions. And we still don't see the end of the tunnel in Syria. So he did not manage to create a stable country, or at least to convince the people that the authority that he is coming with and those on the ground are really people who look at the Syrian or equally, which is not the case, because as you rightly said, there were massacres in the country just only a few months ago and few months after his control of Syria. So the discourse of his security forces are not really giving reassurances to all the Syrians.
You know, and I want to ask you, Elijah, if you can maybe help our audience understand, where does this recent ISIS attack on U.S. soldiers that happened over the weekend fit into all of this? You know, is it a sign of an ISIS resurgence, or is it a more complicated than that and perhaps tied to the shifting balance of power in Syria, given who's in charge now? What's going on there? How can we understand that?
Well, it's actually much more complicated than this because, first of all, the foreign fighters who were assimilated within the Ministry of Defense in Syria are still there, of different nationalities. The Syrian thought at the first beginning to use these foreign fighters to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon or perhaps meet the Western agenda. However, the threat that came from Iraq was determined and was very clear to the Syrian. If you plan to attack Lebanon, the Iraqi government will not be able to control Iraqi groups from attacking Syria. And that created a kind of a balance. However, inside the country, inside the Ministry of Defense and the security forces, these people are takfiris. Most of them fought because of the ideology they were carrying, and they are part of them, people who responded to the al-Zawahiri, Sheikh Ayman al-Zawahiri, al-Qaeda central emir after Osama bin Laden, to go to Bilad al-Sham, to the Levant, and join Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who is Ahmad al-Shara. Therefore, they cannot switch the ideology from one side to another, particularly when they see the Americans in the country, when they see there is no Islamic State that is going to be created in the Levant, because the ideologies of Al-Qaeda and ISIS worked within the line of waiting until they become powerful, and they call it tamkeen. And now they have become powerful. They are in control of the country, but they switch the policy completely toward Israel and the United States. And that doesn't fit with any ideology in Islam because of what the Americans did to the Islamic world and what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians and to the neighboring countries. Therefore, these people are in the security forces. And the first information that was released regarding the killing of 2 U.S. soldiers and their American interpreter, the information was about Syrian security forces opening fire. And then they tried to change the version a little bit. So people who do not follow Syria think, oh no, that is ISIS. Well, they are ISIS. They have the same ideology. They have the same thinking, but some of them do not and want to approach Syria differently today. But those who are still carrying this ideology are embedded within the Syrian security forces and Ministry of Defense.
It's you've touched on this a bit, but what does this new phase in Syria mean for the wider region, and especially, as you mentioned before, with regards to the axis of resistance and, of course, Syria's southern neighbor, Lebanon?
Syria is out of these alliances for the Palestinian, for Hezbollah, for Iraq. It is completely in another place. Therefore, that was a strong hit for those who want to recover their occupied land, but particularly for the Syrians who hope one day to free their country, because the Golan Heights is occupied. And today there is this big part along the borders, the Mount of Hermon, Daraa, part of Daraa, part of Suwaida. So the Israelis really are patrolling Syria, the south of Syria, but even up to 30, 40 kilometers of Damascus, the capital, because of the geography. Therefore, Syria is in another place today. It's not willing to give any support or facilitate for the Palestinian or for the Lebanese resistance who are willing to recover their country, or even for the Syrians who want to fight back. So this is where Syria is today, and it's trying to give concession after concession, a very bad strategy when a country adopts against the Israelis, because Israel, more you give, and Israel say, well, no, this is not what we have asked. We will take this, however, these are our demands. And every time they forward other demands. The Americans here are kind of a passive. They ask and they begging Israel not to attack Syria, but the Israelis are attacking Syria. They are using the Syrian airspace. They have used it to attack Iran. And for the Israelis, Syria is out of the equation. So it is just land to grab. And the difference now is the struggle between Turkey and Israel over the influence over Syria.
And with regard to Palestine specifically and the implications, I mean, obviously Syria is out of the resistance axis, but the Israelis aren't even satisfied with that. Like you said, there really is no satisfying a settler colony like Israel. But the Israelis also have this plan for Syria that they won't let go of, and that is fragmentation. And we see specifically with what they're doing in the south. And, you know, just a few weeks ago, Elijah, it was so wild. The Israelis raided an area south of Damascus and killed like 13 people. People fought back and actually put a couple Israeli soldiers in the hospital. But all that's to say, this is normal now. The Israelis are occupying and like running checkpoints in certain parts of southern Syria now. They go kind of whenever they feel like it. And these raids where they're actually like going into people's neighborhoods and putting guns to their faces. And you have the Syrian government doing really nothing to protect them whatsoever. In this case, the Israelis claim they were going after the Lebanese aligned branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which they said was allied with Hamas. But all that's to say, you know, if Israel, I hope Israel doesn't have its way, but why is Israel so hell-bent on fragmenting Syria into these mini ethno-states?
Well, the important point to notice how the Israelis go shopping in the market, which means they do not fear for their life and they are in a non-hostile environment. Why Israel wants Syria fragmented? It's because it will be easy to take part of the south of Syria and enlarge the Israeli territory, which fits perfectly well with Donald Trump rhetoric before he became president, when he said Syria is too small and need to be enlarged. Therefore, Israel is expanding. And he said Israel needs to be bigger because it's too small. Therefore, Israel has the Druze in the south as a non-hostile population, and the Kurds in the northeast, where they are considered very close to Israel. Therefore, in the east, you have 23% of the entire Syrian geography. And in the Suwaida, there are around 12%. So it's more or less 40% of Syria is non-hostile to Israel. What remains is Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, Hama, and the coast is not friendly with the government, but it can turn against the government when the opportunity arises. So the best scenario for Israel is to have a federation, it kind of what's happening in Iraq for the Kurds in Kurdistan, where they have some autonomy. They can have the Israelis in Kurdistan, Iraq, without any objection from the central government. And this is what the Israelis want in order to wait for a better opportunity and take a bigger part of Syria and just include it into the Israeli occupied territory. And there are no obstacles at the time being. Israel can move toward Damascus, stop at the gate of Damascus and take all the southern part without any problem. Nobody will open a fire against the Israeli advancing. So when you see an Israeli patrol driving into Syria. And as you rightly said, a checkpoint, an Israeli checkpoint, and then Syrian security forces driving by the Israeli checkpoint. We didn't see the Israelis stopping these Syrian security forces and searching what they have in the car, which is something they can do. But this is a real humiliation to Damascus.
Well, it's interesting, Elijah, you say that because, as you mentioned before, there is kind of this battle in a way, or kind of tension between Israel and Turkey over who is going to have more influence in Syria. So how do you see that playing out? You said that the Israelis can essentially march up to the gates of Damascus. What are Turkey's next moves with regards to Syria, and how do you think that tension is going to play out in the next period?
Turkey is very limited. We have seen the Israelis bombing the T4 military airport, was designated to be given to Turkey to establish itself there. It was in the hand of the Syrian and Iranians during the war, and now Turkey moved in. But what the Israeli did is they destroyed everything. So it will be costly for Turkey to reconstruct it and construct the runway and the tower control, etc. But the Israelis are in control of the Mount of Hermon, the Golan Heights. They can see all of Syria until Turkey. They have a visibility that is really scary. And the Turks today, the only thing they can do is to make sure that Damascus doesn't fall, and Syria is not divided if they can save it. This is why they have become softer against the Kurd in the northeast, and they gave Ahmed al-Shara the possibility to negotiate with the Kurds, so they just don't announce their separation from Syria, because they can sustain themselves from the food basket is in the north, and the energy basket of the entire country is in the northeast. So they can be autonomous, they can be self-sufficient, and Turkey changed its policy toward the Kurds to make sure that they continue negotiating with Damascus. But for Turkey, it is not easy to see Israel humiliating the authority in Damascus, doing whatever Israel wants. Turkey working in the shade, because for Turkey is not really something that the Turks would like to do, by coming out and saying we control the rest of Syria, and then the Syrians control nothing. But they are there. When they were in Idlib, they changed the car number plate. They had school teaching Turkish language. They were in control of Idlib, and now they will gradually control the culture, and they will control the education. And the ties between the two countries will be to a level where all the Turkish merchandise will invade Syria, and that will destroy the Syrian economy, because Syria can sell its own product, but it's not competitive with the cheaper Turkish merchandise. Therefore, Syria is not really a country where we can say it is something that is going to be one sovereign country in the near or in the medium future.
And, lastly, Elijah, I really want to lean into not ending everything on a depressing, horrifyingly defeatist note, because it's been a tough year, and everything we're talking about is quite bleak. But do you think this ultimately means that, because I would assume the Americans and Israelis are looking at Syria and the broader region and saying to themselves, oh, we won it all, baby, right? Do you think that's the case, or do you think that's too soon to say? And I guess that's one way of asking, you don't have a crystal ball, and who knows what's going to happen in 2026. But, is the region now in the hands of the Americans and Israelis? Is it over for the resistance?
Well, the very positive aspect, which is I'm really happy for you to ask this question, is the more injustice there is, the more occupation of the country, the better ground is prepared for the resistance. And there are tens of thousands of Syrians who fled the country when Ahmad al-Shara controlled it, and they did not return. But they are on the borders. A large part are in Lebanon, and many people in the country are unhappy. This is how the resistance in Lebanon was created in 1982. It is out of the injustice and occupation. So the weaker Ahmad Shara is, the stronger Israel is and grab more Syrian land. And the policy of the US to remain, today they are legal, but they still occupy northeast of Syria, but legally, because Ahmed Shara gave them the permission to stay, and that will create inevitably the resistance that the Syrian have always retained in the back of their head. They are people who are nationalists and they consider Israel as an enemy. It is not going to be easy at all to force the Syrian to swallow down their throat the presence of the Israelis and the Americans.
Well, Elijah, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You've been on many of our programs, helping us understand all of these shifts that have been taking place over the last few years. And we look forward to chatting with you more in 2026. A very happy new year to you. And thank you so much.
And to you too. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was bleak. And look, it's been a tough year, and we have to be honest about all of the losses. But I really meant what I said, Zoe, in terms of like wanting to lean into the idea that we shouldn't be in defeatist mode. We should be realistic, but also recognize that like it's not game over.
And you know, they spent over a decade trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and in 1 year, al-Shara, I mean, all they can show for him is just his international tours and being received by other like fake leaders, and while his country is in turmoil. So it's not as if they resolved any root problems, and it's not as if they've pacified the country. So of course they succeeded in their top line goal, but in no way is this story over.
No, indeed it is not. Ahmed al-Shara, man, what a year for that guy. Photo ops around the world, from Al-Qaeda to president of a country, to going to New York City.
He stopped wearing the military fatigues. I think they were like, military fatigues reminds people too much of your time in Al-Qaeda. Let's shift to the suit.
His rough past reminds people of his rough past.
His rough past.
So as we continue here on the Girl Power Hour of Breakthrough News with me and Zoe hosting, we're actually going to invite another man into the space in our next segment, which is going to be he's allowed. We've given him permission to join. I'm very honored to welcome to the program Vijay Prashad, who is author, historian, journalist, and the executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Vijay, welcome to the show.
It's very nice to be with you, defined as a man, reduced to that. Happy to be here with you.
Well, I'm glad you are, and I'm glad that you appreciate being reduced to your gender, Vijay. And you know, but in all seriousness, we're gonna talk to you. We're gonna do a bit of a wrap up of the year, and I thought a good place to start this wrap up would be to quote another man, who I'm also going to reduce to his gender, but this is not a lovely man like you. It's a Nazi man called Stephen Miller, one of the top advisors and senior official of the Trump administration. He tweeted this out today, a few hours ago. He said, "For years, the United States has operated as a reverse empire, using its military to enrich foreign nations and foreign peoples, sacrificing our wealth, security, and sovereignty for the sole benefit and advancement of those beyond our borders. All we got in return were migrants. No more. America's might will secure America's rights. America's military will defend America's destiny. For Americans, first and always." So I'm very sorry to subject our audience to this, but unfortunately, the country and world are subjected to this man's policies right now. So I wanted to open with that, Vijay, because I think this sentiment has a lot to do with the shifts that we've seen take place this year. So why don't we start there? I'd love to hear your reaction to Stephen Miller's tweet about America's being a reverse empire.
I mean, it's really good to hear Stephen Miller talk like that, because there is a sense in this MAGA sort of politics that the United States has been taken advantage of. I think that's a very deep seam that runs right through MAGA politics, and that it hasn't got what it deserved. Trump, after all, was against the U.S. war in Iraq, the illegal war, but then later said, we should just go there and take the oil. If the oil had come to the United States, then maybe the war wouldn't have been so bad after all. He quite bluntly said that when the Venezuelans passed a hydrocarbon law in 2001, the very important law which demanded that the Venezuelan people get a better share of their own oil wealth, U.S. oil companies decided for the most part to turn tail. I mean, ExxonMobil pulled up sticks and left. Chevron negotiated, and so Trump then said just a couple of days ago that the United States lost its oil, that oil was its oil, and that the United States now wants to recover its oil. There is this strange sense of aggrievedness, as if imperialism is not a system in which the United States and the Northern Europeans have been able to extract vast amounts of the world's surplus production because of the colonial heritage. As if that is not true. There is this feeling that the United States has been taken advantage of. It's a ridiculous, inaccurate idea, but it actually is not inaccurate, as it were, in the hearts of this MAGA crowd that really feels taken advantage of. If this feeling prevents the United States from going out there and bombing countries, all very good. I don't mind if they end military intervention because they feel taken advantage of. But if this provokes the United States to go out there and, for instance, invade Venezuela, it's a really bad feeling, whether accurate or inaccurate. And right now, with the United States sitting off the coast of Venezuela, this might turn out to be a pretty bad feeling all around.
That's definitely putting it lightly. I mean, I don't want to move away from Venezuela because I think it's such an important story. But Vijay, this past weekend, you live in Chile. This past weekend, Chileans perhaps shocked the world, or didn't shock the world, when they elected Jose Antonio Cast to be their next president. I mean, the numbers showed that he would win, but it is shocking in a way because he is the son of a Nazi. He supports and is a proud supporter of Pinochet. Was a campaigner in the yes vote in Chile to keep the dictatorship. I mean, he has a whole rap sheet, which I'm sure you'll share with us. He won these elections. How do you explain this? And can you talk about his victory within what you're calling the resurgence of the angry tide, or the angry tide that's washing across Latin America? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, why don't we start with the new U.S. national security strategy? Because that's really interesting. That's a strategy that's come to people from a realist standpoint. It's not an idealist strategy. The U.S. government isn't saying we're going to use military force to dominate the whole world. In fact, quite interestingly, the U.S. government suggests in that strategy that, look, China is a world power. The United States cannot engage China right now, but the United States has to take hold of its hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. And having the Western Hemisphere as its own, it needs to use all its mechanisms, whatever forms of power it has, to discipline its hemisphere. In fact, the national security strategy directly names the Monroe Doctrine of 1823 and says this doctrine must be enacted. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is basically the use of force to dominate the entire Western Hemisphere. And look, the tide looks good for the United States. It's not just Jose Antonio Cast in Chile, Javier Milei, an apologist for the military junta, the coup of 1976, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Okay, Mr. Bolsonaro is in jail, but the Bolsonaristas dominate the Chamber of Deputies. Most likely in 2026, the Bolsonaristas are going to take charge of the Senate. Mr. Bolsonaro himself, his son, his wife, they've all said that the 21-year military dictatorship in Brazil, not a bad idea. You go north, Nayib Bukele. Why do we need to talk about a historic dictatorship? He's basically running a dictatorship with the full backing of the U.S. government. Daniel Noboa running a full-scale dictatorship. You, Zoe, know Colombia better than most people. Vicky Davila, if she enters the race from the right, most likely is going to walk all over Ivan Cepeda. This is the angry tide that is sweeping across Latin America and the Caribbean, not just in Latin America. So Jose Antonio Cast, it's not a Chile story. It's a story of Latin America. It's happening all over the place, backed by the United States, but also a consequence of the failure of social democracy in the whole hemisphere. If you don't have an agenda, like Gabriel Boric, who came in, basically he was the beneficiary of the social uprising of 2019. If you come into power, you don't have an agenda. Why would people re-elect you? Or why would people support your political project? You didn't change the terms of politics. It was quite unfair to put Janet Hara, a communist, up against Jose Antonio Cast. It doesn't matter what Mr. Cast's politics were. Had it been Evelyn Matthei, the traditional right, she would have won. It's not about Mr. Cast. Chile didn't vote, in a sense, for Jose Antonio Cast. They voted for anything other than the political project of Gabriel Boric. And in that sense, I would say that Milei in Argentina was a beneficiary of the collapse of Peronist social democracy in that country, and so on and so forth. So it's partly that, it's partly, the influence of the United States and the Spanish right wing through Vox. Vox plays a role in all of this. They have their own so-called Foro Madrid, the Madrid Forum, where they're driving a right-wing agenda across Latin America. All of that is there. And the United States is sniffing around everywhere, trying to find Chinese influences and eject it. And here's the last point. Good luck, Washington, because most countries in the Western Hemisphere, either China is their leading trading partner or it's their number 2 trading partner. Good luck getting rid of China from the hemisphere. A U.S. attack on Venezuela, which would have a horrible impact on Cuba as well, might make the United States feel like it is exercising the Monroe Doctrine. But guess what? There's no Monroe Doctrine when it comes to economics and commerce. You are being outclassed by Chinese businessmen. That's the reality.
I'm glad you brought that up, Vijay, because I feel like as we watch what the U.S. is doing right now, where it's just flexing its muscle everywhere in the most extreme way, everything's a nail and the U.S. is just going to use a hammer, right? And that goes from the genocide in Gaza to gunning down these fishermen and these boats and then boasting about it and committing war crimes and not really caring that everybody finds out and even celebrating it. And all this is happening while there is a kind of decline taking place. I'm increasingly seeing these acts of brutality and barbarism by the U.S., with Gaza being the most extreme one, as in many ways acts of desperation to maintain control over the world. That's not to say that the U.S. is about to fall tomorrow or anything like that, or that the U.S. isn't the strongest country in the world. It is. It has over 1,000 military bases. But if you feel strong and are strong and see a strong future, this seems to be the behavior of a bully who feels weak in a way, that they need to demonstrate their strength through such barbaric acts. And I guess that it's a big question. It fits into, you're talking about China's economy sort of overtaking the U.S. We see what the U.S. is willing to do or help the Israelis do in Gaza, this place that's like completely defenseless in many ways, yet they still can't defeat it, you know? So I guess, what do you think that means when we look at the genocide in Gaza? We're about to hit another Christmas. This will be the third Christmas with a genocide in Gaza taking place. And a very quickly changing world with a more barbaric America. And I guess that's just a lot of thoughts I put out there, and I want to know what you think about what I just said.
Yeah, Rania, if you look back over the past decade, the United States has withdrawn from a number of military conflicts that it's got involved in, whether it's the withdrawal that it was forced to make from Iraq. Remember, it was the Iraqi parliament that refused to give immunity to U.S. troops that effectively ejected the United States from Iraq, and the U.S. had to comply. It was interesting. Now, that doesn't mean the U.S. has left Iraq entirely. The U.S. still sits in the northern part of Iraq, the so-called Kurdish enclave. It still sits in sections of western Iraq, but by and large, it was forced to evacuate. The United States actually had to leave Afghanistan. It lost to the Taliban, was never able to stabilize Libya, and so on. It's not that the United States has shown that it's very good in winning wars or that it's very good in colonizing parts of the world. It's excellent in destroying things. It's a great destroyer. It's not a great colonizer. I mean, the United States tomorrow can bomb Caracas, Barquisimeto, Maracaibo. It can bomb all Venezuelan cities. It can destroy a lot of Venezuelan infrastructure. But the United States cannot colonize Venezuela. It's picked, for instance, once again, an appalling instrument as its instrument for rule. Maria Corina Machado happens to be exactly the same age as I am. So is Jose Antonio Cast. What is happening with my generation? We were all born in the same calendar year. It's horrifying. Maria Corina Machado is a little bit like Ahmad Chalabi. These are elite people with no mass base. The United States could not impose Ahmad Chalabi on the Iraqis. They could not impose Mohammed Jibril on the Libyans. They could not impose Hamid Karzai, on the Afghans, and they won't be able to impose Maria Corina Machado on the Venezuelans. It's just not possible. You can give her 100 Nobel Prizes. She's never going to be able to root herself in the Venezuelan reality. So the US shows that it's excellent at destroying things. You're absolutely correct. Most powerful military force in the world. But it's appalling at being able to colonize places. And no better example than Russia, which the United States actually had an enormous opportunity to shape into its self-image. I mean, Boris Yeltsin was, in fact, slavish in his pro-Americanism. He lost the presidential election in 1996. The communists actually won that election. Gennady Zyuganov should have been the president, but Boris Yeltsin was reinstated. He was entirely grateful to the United States. But look what happened. His heir apparent, Vladimir Putin, again, selected by the United States. They were very happy with the choice of Vladimir Putin when Mr. Yeltsin left office. Vladimir Putin turned against the United States because of the contradictions of reality. So the US once again has to come to terms with the fact you can destroy countries, you can impose leaders, but the contradictions of history are not on your side. I mean, where the contradictions of history are going towards is the emancipation of people. And the United States doesn't stand for human emancipation. So in that sense, whatever it looks like in the present, it has no future for its project of domination.
Well, leave it to Vijay to always make us feel inspired with those words, but I don't want to be not uplifting, but I do want to ask Vijay, One of the other tools of U.S. control that we've seen Donald Trump use to an extreme over the past year, he said last night in his address to the nation that he repeated again that tariffs are his favorite word. And we've seen his tariff policy be quite effective in forcing the world to bend a knee. This tariff offensive has been able to shatter alliances. It's been, countries that were forced to making deals with China, then backed out. What can you say about this tariff offensive? I think the cases of South Korea and Malaysia are quite telling. And where does that leave? Where are we left right now with the push for multipolarity and alternative financial systems? Because it feels that this enthusiasm towards breaking dollar hegemony suffered a bit of a setback.
I mean, I think that, frankly, Mr. Trump's tariff policy was very well thought out. I mean, it may have been, it may have looked dumb to lots of people, particularly certain kinds of technical economists and so on, who had a predisposition to, let's say, the architecture of free trade, or who felt that when the most powerful country uses tariffs, it doesn't make sense. But in fact, what he did was he shook up a lot of relations that the US had. He scared people, he intimidated them. I mean, for God's sake, he had enormous tariffs that he placed against Lesotho, Botswana. I mean, he went against everybody. It had an impact. It shook up countries. It forced them to tear up deals that they had made with the Chinese. It forced them to promise to invest their capital or their precious external reserves into the United States and so on. Whether they'll end up doing that, that's another matter. But they made promises. He got the headlines that he wanted. He was able to take up things quite dramatically. I think it was a pretty good move on the part of Mr. Trump, because that shakeup was itself beneficial for the United States. It's not what the BRICS countries wanted. They have been slowly, steadily, like the turtle building a new world. And meanwhile, Mr. Trump, like the hare, came and danced all around them and tried to smash up some of the institutions they've been building. And to be quite honest, the BRICS turtle was going so slowly and was building things with such, in a sense, timidity, that Mr. Trump's hare was actually, really able to disrupt everything very quickly. It showed you how vulnerable this so-called call to multipolarity is. It's not as strong as you think. It's extremely vulnerable and fragile. And I think Mr. Trump, whoever was the advisor on this, they were quite effective. I mean, they used effectively a missile against the international economy and shook people up. Now, it's not the same as the tariff improving things economically by itself for the United States. That's why technical economists were not seeing the wood for the trees. It's not that tariffs immediately improved situation, let's say, in bilateral trade between the United States and Europe or whatever it is. He used tariffs as a political instrument, not an economic instrument. He used it to exercise the United States' power to remind people that at least for the medium term, they are reliant on northern credit markets. For the medium term, they are reliant on the bond markets of the West that are going to buy debt and so on. I mean, the way he intervened in the Argentinian economy is telling. He gave a statement saying that, look, if you in Buenos Aires province, you vote against Javier Milei, we're going to block financing to you. And then, let's see how you wake up the next morning. And lo and behold, people voted for Mr. Milei's party despite the fact that he's running high levels of unpopularity. So, the tariffs are not an economic instrument for Mr. Trump. They're a political instrument. And in that sense, I think he wielded them quite effectively.
Definitely. I mean, it says a lot that they have to bully so much to get their way, but in many places they are getting their way. That said, I think there was also a few contradictions this year, and I don't mean to be very America-centric here, but on this point I will be, just because in the U.S. you have the rise, the second Trump administration, and the people he has around him, and he does have a very enthusiastic base of people with very fascist leanings who support this cult of personality no matter what. I mean, they sit there and talk about they want anti-establishment, no more wars in America first, but the second Trump wants to go to war and has Marco Rubio, Mr. Neoconservative, little Marco Rubio at the helm. All these same people, they'll call him little Marco Rubio and say boo, but the second Trump likes him and gives him power, they'll say yay. All that's to say, this is happening also at a time when you have Zohran Mamdani, who won the mayoral election in New York City, which is a really big deal. He ran using words like socialism and calling out the genocide in Gaza. And we've talked a lot on this show before about he's already making compromises that are disappointing, to say the least. But that said, there was a base of people who supported him. And in fact, Trump and all these people are very unpopular in the U.S. There's still a huge base of people, not just in the U.S., but around the world, who are very progressive, and who want a more equal system. It's just, we can't rely on multipolarity for that, I guess is what I want to say. And that's where I want to ask you, going into 2026, Vijay, there's been a lot of defeats over the last few years, but what gives you hope when you look around the world, when you see, for me, it's seeing New York City be won by somebody using the word socialism and calling out the genocide in Gaza, regardless of what, the faults that still exist there, is a really big deal and gives me hope about the fact that you can organize people.
Well, I didn't realize that this is the second administration of Trump and that he's only been in office for a year. It feels like he's been there all my life, in a sense. He's such a captivating presence. I can't even remember that before Trump was Biden and so on. I saw Obama's face the other day on my television screen, and I almost said, "Who is he?" Trump has been the eternal president of the United States. At least it feels like that. It's amazing that in 1 year he's done all that he's done. Of course, there's a million points of light, as they say, around the world. There's the very interesting experiment taking place in the Sahel. There's the fact that in the Indian state of Kerala, the communist government has been able to eradicate absolute poverty. It's the second place on earth after China to do that. Certainly, there are mass mobilizations of people all around the world, some of them on a class basis, working class movements, reviving themselves and so on. But I'm going to tell you, there's one area that I think the world the international left really needs to pay attention to. And Trump has made the most of it in this period, which is that the left doesn't really have a good argument against criminality and drugs. The way Trump mobilized the fentanyl crisis in the United States, not only to go after immigrants, but basically to gear up the international population for a war against Venezuela, to say they're narco-terrorists, this, that, and the other. The left's response to this is extremely weak. In Trinidad and Tobago, the prime minister equally joined Mr. Trump, kind of taking a Nayib Bukele position vis-a-vis criminality. In Brazil, 121 people, most likely innocent people, killed in a favela, not a peep from the international community. Because why? The local government says, well, they're all criminals and this, that, and the other. The left doesn't have a good argument on criminality and on the drug war. We take refuge in the language of human rights and so on, but we don't have a good argument. I think we are getting outflanked on that. Bukeleism is extremely popular in parts of South America. This license to go after people who in poor communities are criminals. Trump is riding this wave. Bukele is riding this wave. This was the wave that Rodrigo Duterte rode in the Philippines. And we're going to see much more of this in Asia and Africa. It is going to disrupt a lot of good left projects that are rising up on the wave of the contradictions. If we don't have an argument about criminality, this wave of contradictions that is going to favor the left will not provide us with the subjective ability to take advantage of it. We'll get swept aside by this so-called hysteria around the question of drugs and criminality. And I think Trump has effectively wielded that not only internationally, but in the United States. I mean, what is Zoran Mamdani going to say to the police department? You can't just say abolish the police. You've got to have more than that, because the working class family is going to say, what about my kids when they walk to school and so on? What are we going to say in response? You can't criticize Mr. Mamdani saying, well, he, in the end of the day, he's a cop's mayor. That's not enough. We need an argument here. We can't just live with a high level of morality against reality.
Well, on that note, Vijay, I want to say that we will be having you on a lot in 2026 to try to figure out what that agenda should look like for the left, because it's a conversation we need to be having, because multipolarity is not enough. We got to have an ideology behind it. So all that to say, Vijay, very, very happy holidays and New Year to you. We look forward to seeing you again in 2026. And thank you so much for being on this last Freedom Side Live of 2025.
I'm so happy to be with the two of you, Zoe and Rania. When we are together, it's always a big huggy time. So a big hug to you and Happy New Year, my dears. I'm so happy to see both of these beautiful young women there. It gives me great pleasure. You are the future of 2026 and beyond. So see you later.
Oh, Vijay.
Oh my God, that was like a hug in a sentence. That made me feel very nice. The Vijay is the best. We love Vijay.
We love Vijay.
We love Vijay, and that's why we welcomed him on the Girl Power Hour. We do have another guest who's a woman. Very excited to be joined soon by Katie Halper. But first, Zoe, I got some things to talk about with regard to this war on Venezuela, which escalated dramatically. And it's like every week it escalates dramatically.
Right.
But this week, some new stuff happened, new developments that are quite extreme. We saw Trump institute a naval blockade on Venezuelan oil tankers. And that's after an act of piracy at sea by the U.S., literally like dropping from a helicopter onto a Venezuelan oil tanker to confiscate, literally steal the oil, like pirates, because they tried to claim, oh, this oil is sanctioned. Well, the U.S. actually does not have the right to do that. There is international law, and U.S. sanctions are not international law. The only reason other countries abide by U.S. unilateral coercive measures or sanctions is because they're scared to upset the U.S. Money people. They don't want to be cut out of the U.S. financial system because the dollar's dominant. So, a lot of countries will follow along so that they don't get sanctioned as well, so that they don't get cut off from their money, which is typically sitting in U.S.-controlled financial institutions. That said, there is nothing legal about what the U.S. did. And then it got even crazier because we saw, I want to show a clip that I'm sure many of you have seen at this point, but it's Donald Trump, after all this time, Zoe, of talking about narco traffickers and Maduro's a narco trafficker, and we got to go into Venezuela to save Americans from narco trafficking, even though, as we've talked about on this show, you and I did a very extensive episode of Dispatches on how Venezuela and why Venezuela is being attacked, and it has nothing to do with drugs, and actually Venezuela is not the dominant trafficker of drugs, like at all. A lot of Trump's allies are. But all that's to say, I want to show a video of Trump from just yesterday explaining what the real reason behind his attack on Venezuela is.
We want it back. They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
So there you have it. He wants our oil back, or his oil back, his land back. So he's literally accusing Venezuela of stealing America's oil and right to land that is not America's land or oil. And this goes back to why the U.S. has continued to attack Venezuela. And that is because Venezuela had a revolution, the Bolivarian Revolution, and took control of its oil resources and used the profits from those resources to redistribute its own resource wealth to the people, building schools, building clinics. I mean, clinics in places where people had never been to a doctor or a dentist because they didn't have roads. The literacy rate shot up, mortality rate went down. Venezuela was better off as a society as a result of redistributing that wealth. But this is just the words of a colonialist who thinks the entire world, just like we showed earlier, the video of Trump saying he gave the Golan Heights to Israel. That's not yours to give to Israel. The Golan Heights is not your land, Donald Trump, and Venezuela's oil is not your oil. Stephen Miller also seems to be delusional about Venezuela. He tweeted out that I'm going to just quote him. I'm sorry I'm quoting Stephen Miller so much, but unfortunately he's a very powerful person in the world at the moment. And he's been one of the architects of Trump's regime change policy against Venezuela this year. He tweeted, "American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property. These pillaged assets were then used to fund terrorism and flood our streets with killers, mercenaries, and drugs." I mean, this man is actually delusional because it was not American sweat or ingenuity or toil that created Venezuela's oil industry. It was Venezuelans that did that. It's just amazing. Like, this is such projection. Like, American imperialists are the thieves. And these people are saying the reverse. But again, it goes back to the fact that they're being very open about the fact that this is about oil. And before I get your take on all of this, Zoe, because you are a Venezuela expert, I just want to say that, we saw Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, in a Vanity Fair interview.
It's a good one.
That Trump, it's a good interview. It's full of lots of gems. But there was a few gems about Venezuela, and she said to Vanity Fair that Trump wants to keep bombing these alleged drug boats in the waters off the coast of Venezuela, basically until Nicolas Maduro, quote, cries uncle. So bombing those drug boats is about removing Nicolas Maduro from power. And one last clip I want to show, Zoe, and then again, I definitely want to get your take on all this, is of somebody we've talked about a lot on the show, Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, but is anything but peaceful. And she had this to say about Trump potentially bombing her country.
So President Trump said that land strikes to stop drug trafficking specifically will start soon. He has been saying that for weeks. Do you know what he is talking about? And has he promised you anything?
No, I don't know. And well, if I knew, I wouldn't say it, of course, but it's not the case. We are not involved and we will not get involved into another nation's policy for their own national security.
But would you welcome U.S. military action?
I will welcome more and more pressure so that Maduro understands that he has to go, that his time is over. And I will insist something that I've said several times before. This is not conventional regime change. This cannot be compared to other cases like countries in the Middle East. We had an election. Mm-hmm. Regime change was already mandated by over 70% of the population. And what we need is support to enforce that decision.
How do you square military action with receiving a peace prize? Are we at the point it's necessary?
What we're fighting for is precisely freedom in order to have democracy, and democracy in order to have peace. And in order to maintain freedom and to achieve freedom, you do need strength. The contrary would be the peace of the dead, in which you have a country under absolute, oppression and simply given in. And that's not the case. It's absolutely absurd that you see a regime, a criminal regime like Maduro, that gets support from Russia or from Iran, and then as a Venezuelan people not to ask support from democratic countries and democratic leaders. That's absolute absurd. We do not have arms. We have our will. We have the power of organization and the power of love, which at the end, I have to say that peace is ultimately an act of love.
You guys, you heard it here, folks, from Maria Corina Machado. Bombing her country U.S. bombing her country is an act of love. And listen to her rattle off about democracy when Maduro won democratic elections and she wants U.S. military bombs to take him out. And she's using words like peace and democracy, an act of love. Well, it's got to suck for her. Like, she's probably meeting with her PR people and pissed off because she's like, why does Trump keep telling everyone it's about oil? She's going around telling the world it's about democracy to impose herself on Venezuela. And then Trump just shatters that by repeatedly talking about oil. And I also want to say, Zoe, Stephen Miller and Trump, like Stephen Miller saying that the Venezuelans took our resources away from us is exactly what the British Empire and the Americans said about Iran under Mossadegh, who the CIA backed a coup against in 1953 because he nationalized the oil industry in Iran so that they could benefit from their own resources, is that they were basically stealing the white man's resources that was not in the white man's country.
Yeah, it's hard to recover after listening to Maria Corina Machado.
Yeah.
It's just like saying if you string together buzzwords, you can get a sentence that can defend military action. But I think it's extremely telling what both Stephen Miller and Trump have said. I mean, as we've talked about so much, Rania, they basically just try every single justification and see if it sticks. They're desperately trying to change the minds of the 70% of people in the United States who are against any military action in Venezuela. They know that they're up against this reality where people actually do not agree with this policy whatsoever. And so, for a couple months, they try really hard to say that Maduro is a kingpin of a drug trafficking network. Their own evidence, there's not evidence to back that claim up. And so they said, okay, yeah, sure, let's just go to the next thing and make it sound more serious. They say now, this is our oil. And first of all, like, no one's buying it. No one's saying, yeah, this oil belongs to the US. I mean, it's extremely clear that this is theft. It is an act of piracy. As you said, as many people have said, is an act of piracy. And it is also an attempt, again, as Vijay spoke about, this national security strategy of the United States, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It is about establishing dominance in what the U.S. considers to be its natural zone, its natural sphere of influence and dominance. It is not happy with the fact that just 50 miles to the south of Florida, you have Cuba, a socialist revolutionary government that has resisted for over 6 decades, hundreds of assassination attempts, dozens, if not hundreds of attempts to undermine Cuba's revolutionary process, invasion attempts carried out, backed by the United States. I mean, of course, there's a very rich history of U.S. intervention in Cuba. It is not happy that the world's largest oil reserves are controlled by a socialist revolutionary government that not only believes in using its oil wealth to enrich its own country, to fund social programs, to lift people out of poverty, to provide healthcare, to provide education, to build its national economy, to attempt to diversify its national economy. It's funny, they always get angry at Venezuela for being dependent on oil, yet at the end of the day, what they really want is Venezuela's oil. But Venezuela has also been fundamental in building a Latin American, the Caribbean region that is less dependent on the United States. Venezuela had multiple programs of economic integration with other countries. Petrocaribe, which was a program that ran for many years that basically gave Caribbean countries, small island nations that have obviously a lot of difficulties developing their economy if they don't have natural resources, if they don't have gas, their islands. The only way they can get oil and fuel to, run their countries is importing it. Importing it from the United States is prohibitively expensive. So Venezuela made agreements with a lot of Caribbean nations to export oil to them in exchange for example, human resources, or would it be food crops, etc. So many of these agreements had been fundamental in shaping the Caribbean, into empowering Caribbean nations. Venezuela's relations, at times, of course, Colombia extremely hostile, but it played a very important role in shaping institutions in South America as well, in empowering the people of Latin America and the Caribbean, in empowering the Venezuelan people to actually see themselves once again as a region that had the strength to be, sufficient amongst itself to engage as a bloc with other, regional blocs, building the CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, which has relations as a bloc with the European Union. Of course, more to say on that, but really the role that it's played within the region cannot be underestimated. And the role that it plays as a thorn in the side of Washington, as a socialist experiment that has yielded material benefits for the people, is something that Washington cannot tolerate. And the fact that 8 million people would rather take up arms to defend their country than bend the knee to Washington is something, first of all, they can't ever understand, but it's something that really angers them. They have tried everything in Venezuela. I mean, it's been less years than they've tried against Cuba, of course, but they have tried, funding Maria Corina Machado's NGO to have a revocation vote. They have backed violent riots. They have helped create the Lima Group, which was a bloc of South American countries that put massive pressure on Venezuela. They imposed over 1,000, and I think it's important that you said this, Rania, unilateral coercive measures. Sanctions are something that the United Nations can impose, and it's through international law. What the U.S. has done is unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela, attempting to strangle its oil sector, strangle its production, seize its resources. This is not the first act of piracy, the one that took place this past weekend. The U.S. has seized billions of dollars of Venezuela's sovereign assets with it could be using to fund its programs, but instead the United States says that, we recognize Juan Guaido, so we're going to steal billions of dollars that you have. And so all of this has taken place, and still Venezuela stands firm. Still Venezuela says we defend our Bolivarian socialist project. Still Venezuela says we are a sovereign nation, and still millions, and I say millions because it is millions, and still millions of people say that we would rather die than become a colony of the United States. And they have said this under sanctions, they have said this under threat of military action, and they will continue to say it.
And I think it's really important to understand that Venezuela has survived this long because it's a people-powered government with revolution behind it. And the U.S., like you said, has thrown everything at it, even appointing a fake president, Juan Guaido. Forgot about those days. And now Maria Corina Machado wants to ride into Venezuela on like the back of a U.S. tank and calling that democracy in an act of love, actually, literally. And, it's also like you have the White House throwing everything now in terms of they recently labeled fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction, which gives you really Iraq war vibes. There it is. That's the White House.
Which also is not produced in Venezuela or shipped or distributed from there. Like it's not...
It's all BS. And then you have these moments where Donald Trump is mask off and is like, it's about the oil. You've also heard Maria Corina Machado. We've played these clips before of her promising it's going to be a big boon to the oil industry when she takes Venezuela back, because she's going to let Chevron and all the oil companies, Exxon, Mobil, come do whatever the hell they want in Venezuela and basically steal the oil for free. Though, interestingly enough, there was a Politico article saying that those oil companies don't really want to go back into Venezuela. So I was a little confused by that. But all of that's to say, you also had this attempt yesterday, and it failed, for these progressive Democrats from the Congressional Progressive Caucus led this fight to try to impose a war powers resolution that was aimed on at reining in Donald Trump's airstrikes on these alleged drug running boats and trying to prevent an actual land strikes in Venezuela. And unfortunately that failed because Republicans managed to defeat it. And I'm pretty sure John Fetterman joined with them. Oh no, sorry, he's a senator. So it had gone to the Senate. he would have definitely joined with them. But, Republicans control the House, and I think it was a nice effort to try. But the sad truth of the matter is that this, as much as this is Donald Trump's escalation and Marco Rubio's escalation, Stephen Miller's escalation, this has been a bipartisan war against Venezuela from each administration, from, whether we're talking about Bush or the Obama administrations or Trump 1 or Biden or Trump 2. This has been building off each other. And I've said it so many times, these strikes on these fishermen boats under the auspices of fighting against drug cartels is using precedent that was set by Obama. It was under Obama that he claimed executive authority to strike at defined terrorist organizations anywhere in the world without having to receive congressional approval. So,
and by
Donald
the way,
Trump's administration,
Venezuela's government is now declared a foreign terrorist organization,
which is basically them laying the groundwork to try to take out Venezuelan government officials, which you could also say is built on the Israelis with American backing taking out the entire senior leadership of not just Hamas, not just Hezbollah, but the Iranian military. Earlier this year. These are all setting precedents again, these are supported by Democrats and Republicans because they're both imperialist parties. And so this is as much the Democrats' fault as it is Donald Trump's, and even the media. Even the bipartisan media is kind of sitting back and applauding this. They're pushing back against the more extreme aspects of it because it's very clownish, because it's Donald Trump, because he's so bombastic about it. But at the end of the day, they support the end game. That's why Marina Corina Machado was given a Nobel Peace Prize. So I don't know if there's anything you wanna add before we move on to our next guest, Zoe, but this is definitely a very dangerous situation that we're in.
No, I mean, it's a bipartisan push. They have not done enough to stop it. And every single thing that has happened that the U.S. has, every action that the U.S. has taken against Venezuela for the past 2 decades is laying the groundwork for them later to say and attempt to sway public opinion to say, now we can invade Venezuela. Thankfully, the people of the United States are not taking it. And I think the thing that we have to take hope in and take solace in is that 70% of people in the United States are still against military action against Venezuela. It is extremely unpopular. People are seeing this for what it is, a regime change war. They don't listen to Maria Corina Machado because they understand that this means attempting to send U.S. boots on the ground to change a government by force. There's no other word for it besides regime change war. And that's essentially what Stephen Miller and Trump have confirmed. So people are against this. The opposition continues to grow as there's more and more violations. But of course, we're going to come back to this in 2026, and hopefully we'll have better news.
And on that note, we are going to turn to our next guest, who is not a man, is a woman who's joining the Girl Power Hour with Rania and Zoe. I guess we're renaming the show today.
Yeah.
I want to welcome to the show one of our faves. You know and love her. She's the host of the Katie Halper Show, and she's a co-host of Useful Idiots. Katie Halper, welcome to the Freedom Side Live.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's so great to see you, Katie, but unfortunately what we're going to be talking about is not great. We want to talk to you about this horrific massacre that took place at Bondi Beach in Australia over the weekend. Really, really horrific anti-Semitic attack against gathering of people who were celebrating Hanukkah. And Katie, immediately after it happened, before, we even knew who did it, before, we even knew the actual death toll, because, that people were still getting treated, you saw an immediate political manipulation of this attack, where it was politicized by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who disgustingly blamed it on Australia's decision to recognize a Palestinian state earlier this year. You had Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar saying, and I'm quoting him, that these are the results of the anti-Semitic rampage in the streets of Australia over the past 2 years, with the anti-Semitic and inciting calls of globalize the Intifada that were realized today. You had Bret Stephens of the New York Times, who just loves that genocide in Gaza, who wrote an op-ed titled Bondi Beach is what globalized the Intifada looks like. You had the Holocaust Museum tweet out the following. They said repeated calls to globalize the Intifada predictably resulted in Jews, including a Holocaust survivor, being murdered in cold blood. So, Katie, I want to ask you, what do you make of these statements?
I mean, it is so ridiculous. And I guess I want to say that a couple things. One is that obviously what happened in Australia is terrible. I condemn it. And I think that we have to bear in mind that there's a big difference between contextualizing and condoning, right? So no one I know from the pro-Palestine movement has celebrated or condoned what happened. And it is terrible. Now, the truth is, though, that this has nothing to do with calls for globalizing the Intifada. We don't even know if there's any connection to Palestine. We don't know what these people's opinions, the shooters' opinions are on Palestine. But to the extent that you want to link anti-Semitism to Israel-Palestine, the issue is not calls to globalize the Intifada. The issue is what Israel is doing. Now, I say this as a Jew, right? I obviously, morally, politically, ethically do not support attacks, violence against Jews, civilians. That has nothing to do with opposing Israel's actions and Israel's violence. But if we want to understand why anti-Semitism is growing, then we need to look at what Israel is doing to perpetuate it. We need to look at not the calls for globalize the Intifada, but what's making people more anti-Semitic is Israel live streaming a genocide while saying that it's in the name of Jews. Now, again, I want to be clear. There's anti-Semitism that has nothing to do with Israel-Palestine, right? There are anti-Semites who are happy to be anti-Semites no matter what. But obviously, what Israel is doing, especially when it's in the name of Jews, when they're claiming it's in the name of Jews, is going to lead people to be angrier with Jewish people because they think, wrongly, that all Jews are unanimously supporting this. And the reason they think that is because of Israel, because of the ADL, because of AIPAC, which claims that all Jews support Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza and that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I want to point out that the claim that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is really ironic because that is actually based on the whole dual loyalty trope that uses Zionism and Jewishness, right? Or Jews and Zionists, they use those terms interchangeably. That's like old school anti-Semitism, right? That's like Jews are loyal to a foreign country, the Jewish this, the Zionist this. It's like neo-Nazi talk, KKK talk, but really the irony is that Israel, AIPAC, and the ADL have kind of the same talking points as they do because they are saying that being Jewish is synonymous with supporting the state of Israel. There's obviously a coordinated campaign to attribute this to globalize the Intifada. But I got to say, Caitlin Johnson, the Australian journalist, put together a list of there were 22 headlines linking the Intifada, calls for globalizing the Intifada to what happened. And I got to say that if people are concerned with language and Jewish safety, then they really should, and this is uncomfortable probably for some people, but then Jews need to be saying, not in our name. Jews need to be saying, Israel does not represent us. Israel needs to stop what it's doing. It won't, of course. Israel needs to stop what it's doing and saying that it's in the name of Jewish safety or in the name of Jews. Now, again, I'm not condoning people attacking Jews based on what Israel's doing, but I'm saying it will happen. That doesn't mean we embrace it, we support it. I condemn it. I'm sure you condemn it too. And of course, in my own self-interest, as someone who is very pro-Palestine and critical of Israel, if I go to it something Jewish, people may not know that. So obviously on a very immediate level, I don't want these attacks to happen against Jewish people, but also morally and ethically, I don't. But again, it's just rich to think that what's making Jews less safe are people saying globalize the Intifada and not Netanyahu talking about Amalek, not Israel killing civilians, killing children, blowing them up, saying that children who are being starved to death had pre-existing conditions. I mean, how do people think that that's not going to put Jews at risk? And then the whole issue, obviously, there's the slaughter and genocide of Palestinians, which we have to be very clear about and clear-eyed about and condemn. But it's just ironic that I'm talking about Jewish safety because that is the argument that's being used now in response to in response to what's happening in Australia. And sorry about that. I was waiting for another show to start, and it started. I forgot to mute it. I'm silencing myself. That's how much self-censorship there is of anti-Zionist Jews.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Breakthrough news of all places.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Two anti-Zionist Jews, though. We're out here. You know, what I would just add to what you said, Katie, it's interesting because Netanyahu actually congratulated Jose Antonio Cast, who, again, is the son of a Nazi. So we have Israelis getting excited about, you know, descendants of Nazis winning elections because he will be more friendly to Israel than Gabriel Boric was. So, you know, it really shows how far we've come. And, you know, another really disgusting, you know, product of this attack, you know, in addition to the attacks on the pro-Palestine movement, has just been outright Islamophobia. So we've seen very, very gross expressions of this. U.S. Rep from Florida, Randy Fine, said it's time for a Muslim travel ban, radical deportation of all mainstream Muslim legal and illegal immigrants, and citizen revocations wherever possible. So this is extremely serious. He also said mainstream Muslims have declared war on us. The least we can do is kick them the hell out of America. You know, what are your thoughts on this anti-Muslim Islamophobic statements happening right now? And how are these kind of acts of bigotry being used to just kind of reinforce one another?
Yeah, I mean, it's really disturbing. And, you know, Islamophobia is kind of the new acceptable racism. One thing I just want to add that I forgot to mention in the previous question is that, you know, for all the condemnation of globalized intifada, we also have coordinated condemnation of the call from the river to the sea. And that is just so ironic because the Likud charter actually says between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. So again, the hypocrisy is stunning. What do they say? Every accusation is a confession, and that's very true. I mean, the exploitation of this to justify slaughter of people in Gaza and Islamophobia more generally is predictable and also disgusting. So now you have the Israel state, which claims to represent all Jews, saying that basically Muslims are bad. I mean, Randy Fine is like the biggest anti-Semitism like vector in the world. He's so disgusting. And like, I wish he would stop saying he was Jewish. Like, I feel unsafe every time he opens his mouth. He's such a disgusting bigot. Yeah, he's just, I wish we could like trade him, you know, like give him away, you know. But
who are you gonna give him to though? That's just
I don't know, like a bigotry tribe. Yeah, you're right. No one deserves it. Actually, Druze. I'll give it to the Druze, Rania. You can take them.
But
the Druze.
I mean, there are. He can't. It's a closed religion. You can't.
I know you won't let him in. Yeah, thank God. Thank Yahweh. Thank God. Or thank
It's closed for that reason.
Yeah, I know. You guys were good. You planned ahead. But you know, it's so racist. It's like Muslims are this monolith, right? Ironically, it kind of reflects the anti-Semitic view of Jews of this monolith that Israel perpetuates. But I mean, one thing that's great, and of course, it wouldn't have been Muslims' job to condemn this had this not happened, but those claims are pretty undermined by the fact that it was someone from Syria, right? Because there's Islamophobia and then there's just like anti-Arab racism. But like it was someone from Syria who disarmed this person. And like what the hell did Randy Fine do? I mean, what could he have done if he had been there? He would have like rolled over on the floor probably. But you know, the idea
he would have used like a child as a human shield probably.
Yeah, wrapped himself around. Yeah, oh my God. Which would have been well, I'm not going to body shame, so I'm not going to say anything else. But would have used a bunch of kids. He would have used a bunch of kids.
A lot of kids. Yeah. I mean, he'd likely want to use Palestinian children, but if they weren't on hand, he'd probably use the Jewish children around him.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, because that's a great metaphor for, you know, Israel requires anti-Semitism, by the way, to justify its existence. You know, the way that it is. Not to sound corny, but, you know, Jewish safety and safety of Muslims and safety of Arabs, like whether it's in Palestine or abroad, they do go hand in hand, right? Like this is both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are the result of many things: imperialism, colonialism. But in terms of the ideology, it is white supremacy, right? Like the people who hate Jews also hate Arabs and Muslims. I mean, there are people who are Jewish who hate Muslims and Arabs, right? But we have to see these scourges as interconnected, and they really are. And there's the only safety will come not from apartheid and genocide, but will come from solidarity. You know, again, that is that maybe it sounds corny, but it's definitely true. And you know, this is also like this framing of religion versus religion is such BS. You know, people like to say, oh, this conflict, you know, it's an occupation. This conflict is the result of ancient hatreds between Muslims and Jews, which first of all, these people in Israel are fine killing Christians. So let's just add that to the conversation. And they're fine killing Jews. We know this because of the way that hostages were more afraid of being killed by Israeli bombs than they were by the Hamas who were holding them, or whoever was, you know, in some cases Hamas, in some cases other organizations. But you know, it's also just shows such ignorance because that's not what this is about. This is not a religious conflict. And Jews and Muslims and Christians live side by side in that area for centuries. But, you know, this is also a major example of ignorance that equates ISIS with Hamas. And those organizations are not compatible. I mean, there's not, like, Hamas does not have an extraterritorial plan. They do not have an international plan.
ISIS does, yeah.
ISIS does. I mean, it's they're apples and oranges, and the only reason that people are able to compare those two things is because of Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism. But you know, they have as much in common as like liberation theology and the Crusaders, right? Like if you want to take the Christian example, or they have as much in common as like, you know, settlers and Jewish Voice for Peace.
Right. You know, Katie, real quick, I just want to, the man you were talking about, his name was Ahmed al-Ahmed, the Syrian man who, I mean, it was actually like wild. It was kind of like out of a movie to see how he very bravely put himself in danger to disarm this guy and actually got shot but survived. And this was a man from Syria who's Muslim, and you had Benjamin Netanyahu initially praising a Jew, praising because they initially thought it was a Jewish guy. But, you know, and I just want to say that this killing, it was carried out by a father and a son that have been reportedly said to be associated with the Islamic State, with ISIS. They killed 16 people. I think one of the gunmen is in that death toll, and they injured 40, which is just, you know, absolutely horrifying, so scary. But I want to go back to what you were saying about the idea of Israel making Jews less safe, because, you know, I saw this photo that was circulating recently of basically these Israeli soldiers lighting this big menorah to celebrate like the first night of Hanukkah, but they were doing it on the ruins of Palestinian homes that had been destroyed in a refugee camp in the West Bank. And this is not a new thing we've seen. The Israelis have done that in the Golan Heights. We've seen them do that sort of thing in Gaza. We've seen throughout the genocide in Gaza, and even before, how they use the Star of David as this sort of hateful graffiti symbol to mark the areas they've destroyed or occupied. You know, the Israeli leadership themselves are constantly saying that they're carrying out this genocide of Palestinians in the name of Judaism. They always call themselves the Jewish state, and they, you know, also seem to love anti-Semites, like Zoe was saying, as long as, you know, those anti-Semites support Zionism, like the Nazi who won in Chile. And before I get your reaction to all of that, I do want to play this clip of Miriam Adelson speaking alongside Donald Trump recently. And let's go ahead and play that clip, and then I'll sort of ask you what I want to hear from you about that.
And now I met Alan Dershowitz, and he said the legal thing about 4 more years. And I said, Alan, I agree with you. So we can do it. Think about it.
Alan's here someplace. Where's Alan?
Alan is here. Oh, he had a flight.
Oh, a flight, Lolita flight, maybe. Flight on the Lolita Express.
Lolita Express, yeah.
Thank you.
It's great. So that's at This is Trump hosting this Hanukkah reception, and Miriam Adelson is, I mean, that's her, somebody who's donated, what is it, like $200 million or something to Donald Trump's campaign. And he basically says that's the reason that he, is just doing, I mean, he's doing everything he can for Israel because he's an American imperialist president, as they always are. But he's really going the extra mile for the Likud party, largely because of Miriam Adelson, right? And the influence that the way she's used her money to push for Likud policies inside the U.S. government. And so all that's to say, I mean, you have all of these things happening. You have Israeli soldiers carrying out crimes in the name of Jewish holidays. You have Miriam Adelson running around bragging about collaborating with a fascistic administration to have a third term. And you have Zionists openly collaborating with the American administration under Donald Trump to also basically attack our democratic rights. And they're doing this in the name of protecting Jews. Right. And so I guess I want to ask you, Katie, like, how does that make you feel as a Jewish person? And you are very, like, you know, you're secular, but Judaism, right. I mean, being Jewish is a big part of your identity. So I guess, how does that make you feel as a part of this identity group when you see all this happening?
Well, you know, one thing I want to add is this image that was tweeted out. I don't know if you guys saw it. It had a menorah with, instead of like the lights on top of the menorah, it had beepers. And obviously, Rania, this is something that you made a documentary about.
Yeah, I saw that. Right?
Yeah. It's like, it honestly looks like an anti-Semite is like they look like anti-Semitic plants, these people. Like, they are linking Judaism with genocide, the Jewish religion. Now, I'm not, as you pointed out, I'm not religious, but I certainly want to point out the fact that Judaism was around for a lot longer than Zionism. And these people are really perverting and, they're attempting to destroy Judaism. That's really what they're doing. In the name of this fascistic ideology, they are happy to sacrifice Jews, but also Judaism on the altar of this death cult, right? Like, I mean, can you imagine, like, the work that they're doing, again, for the cause of anti-Semitism? Like, you really can't make this up. And I mean, it's horrific. Seeing any celebration, kind of like religification of genocide would be horrific no matter what religion it was. But, you know, knowing that this is the religion that my family many generations ago comes from, and knowing again that for Israel and for anti-Semites and for, I mean, being religious doesn't necessarily matter for anti-Semites, right? And to be fair, it doesn't matter for me. Like, I really identify as Jewish and I'm not religious. And there's a whole culture and history of secular Jewishness, which we can get into another time. But it is despicable. And I actually, again, in terms of the religion, like, I don't have any skin in the game because I don't practice Judaism, but I feel really bad for religious Jews who are not hateful bigots, fans of genocide, that they are watching their religion be used to justify this. And, you know, there's great people like Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, who talks about how much he actually has a book, The Broken Wheel, and the subtitle Zionism from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft. So, you know, you can argue that Zionism really is exploiting Judaism and harming Judaism and harming, again, and, you know, Zoe and Rana, you know that I don't like focus on Jewish safety above Palestinian safety, but obviously just to contextualize it, like, we are talking about the effect this has on Jews, given the way this is being framed as a Jewish safety issue. And I guess that, you know, for people watching, they probably already agree with us on this issue. But I would say to Jews who don't, like, if you, I would like for you to see the genocide as a moral scourge and as an atrocity, and never again is now, and how, you know, a state that was allegedly, we know it wasn't, but claimed to be founded on never again and in response to the Holocaust, watching it perpetuate a genocide is despicable. But honestly, if you don't care about Palestinians, you should just care about this from a safety perspective. Like, I don't appreciate, you're not going to be a comrade of mine, and we're probably not going to enjoy, like, having a dinner together because of our views. But, like, this is an issue of Jewish safety, and people, whatever is needed to wake people up, you got to recognize that. So again, if you care about language and Jewish safety, you shouldn't be worrying about globalized intifada, which, by the way, intifada means shaking off. And and Holocaust museums, including Vad Yashem, had the way they translated the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was with the word intifada. So there's nothing inherently violent about intifada. There were 2 intifadas. The first one was almost entirely nonviolent. But again, if you care about Jewish safety, if you care about violence, and you care about language, then you want Israel to stop saying we represent Jews. And you want Jews out there, my fellow Jews, you should be saying not in our name. Israel does not represent us. And this is a genocide that we condemn.
Yeah, well, as somebody sitting next to 2 Jews.
Yeah.
2 Jews and a Druze. Is that what you want to say?
2 Jews and a Druze.
Yeah.
I appreciate the 2 Jewish women situated next to me, or not really sitting next to me,
Placed.
who are constantly condemning violence from all places. And yeah, like when I think about what Israel's doing in the name of Judaism, it's like the Islamic State carrying out beheadings in the name of Islam.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah.
You know, or about like the Crusaders, you know, just
or
like
West
massacring
Euro
people
Baptist
across
Church,
countries in the name of Christianity.
Or killing abortion providers, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But it's like the entire media apparatus in the West has given the Israelis a megaphone to say this to everyone. Right. And they've normalized it so much that it's like at this point, you know, unfortunately, it's very sad. And I don't know if this is why, you know, if these guys were Islamic State guys, you know, fine. But at this point, like, you are going to create a situation where crazy homicidal people are going to come after Jews in the name of like being homicidal towards Israel. Like that's going to happen. Yeah. You're creating the conditions for that. And it's horrible. Right. Katie Halper, thank you for joining us to discuss this very sensitive but crucial topic.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
Just one more thing.
Yes,
that
of course.
Speaking of this issue, I'm working on a documentary that actually elevates, like focusing on Jewish Holocaust survivors who are saying not in our name and saying never again is now, and saying like the takeaway from the Holocaust is that what Israel is doing is wrong. And so I think those are important voices to hear. Yeah.
It's a great takeaway. It seems like that's a lesson that I learned from the Holocaust. But, you know, there's a lot of people who are freaking out that that's unfortunately the lesson that a lot of Jews learned from the Holocaust.
Oh, right. Like that Sarah Hurwitz woman.
Like Sarah. Yeah, exactly. But Katie Halper, thank you so much for joining us for our last episode of 2025 for the Freedom Side Live. We hope to see you on many times in 2026.
Definitely. Great. Would love to come back. And thanks for having me on and for everything you guys do at Breakthrough News.
Well, the feeling is so mutual. We love Katie. And Zoe, that brings us to the end of the Girl Power Hour on Breakthrough News. It was thank you. It was
just one Jew and a Druze now.
It's just one Jew and a Druze. I want to remind people to please, if you like Breakthrough News, please consider becoming a member. By going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And most importantly, you can be participating and helping an independent media outlet go even higher, to level up. We're trying to level up here at Breakthrough News. We have lots of plans for 2026. I can't wait to announce them to the audience. So much is coming, but we need your help to make a lot of it happen. So patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You can also actually donate on YouTube. We have usually have running fundraisers on each video, and you can donate in the live chat. But recurring members, you get access to all kinds of things. So do consider that. Make sure that you smash that like button.
Smash that like button.
It helps boost us in the algorithm. And make sure that you are subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure that you hit that bell so that you get a notification whenever we post new content. And yeah, make sure that you're liking and commenting on these episodes. It helps us in the algorithm as well, which just has been very rude to us, very rude for the last few months. But you know, I think we're going to try and fix that. But on that note, Zoe, do you have any final words for our last live stream of 2025?
Well, I'm glad that Tucker Carlson was wrong and that Trump did not make I mean, sorry for Rania who woke up at 4 a.m. because Tucker Carlson
I woke up at 4 a.m. to listen to Trump's speech because I thought maybe he's going to announce an invasion of Venezuela.
Well, I'm glad that he was wrong, and I hope he continues to be wrong about that. And no more wars. No more wars.
It's so simple. No more wars.
So simple. So simple. But I want to remember the words that Vijay imparted on us, because I think it's really important as we're closing this year, which, as we've said, has been really difficult and a lot of setbacks, a lot of unexpected threats of war where we didn't maybe think they would happen so quickly. A lot of shows of U.S. dominance, but the arc bends towards humanity, and that these contradictions are not sustainable, and that they're pushing towards a world where the U.S. will not be the hegemon, and people across the world will be able to live in dignity. But it is a future that we have to fight for, and we're together in that fight. We are your media outlet for that fight. So let's go into 2026 with all of that determination. We have to do it together. The battle is on many fronts. And I'm confident, Rania, I know you're confident. We're not going to let them win. So let's go forward.
No, we're not. We got to do our part here. And to everyone who is watching, we want to thank you for being such loyal viewers of Breakthrough News, and stick around for 2026. We have a lot coming your way. Zoe, it was a pleasure to co-host with you today. And we will be back in 2026. Happy New Year, everyone.
Everything that gets in its way.